Good evening. The electric current of systemic racism and oppression has shocked our city once again. The question that is before us now in this defining moment is who holds the power. We stand here today in the shadow of the satellite of bigotry and oppression, this Confederate monument that for far too long has sent waves of racism throughout the structure of our government that has resulted in the destruction of black leadership in our city. We stand here today as an association still calling for its removal from Times Square, for it only perpetuates environments that diminishes equality, eradicates opportunity, and gives rise to the patterns of unfairness such as the constructive firing, yes, not resignation, but constructive firing of Police Chief Tanya Chapman. There still may be some who yet still wonders if racism still exists in the fabric of America and in this city, despite the disparities that exist when one looks at the quality of life here in the port city. Let this moment now be a time where we collectively set aside the question of its existence and join together in a clarion call for its removal. We have all witnessed these patterns before. In April 2016, this electric current of systemic racism and oppression voted to fire the Portsmouth City Auditor without due cause. In April 2017, City Councilman Mark Whitaker was unseated from council at the hand of this same electric current of racism and oppression. And now, in most recent news, to undermine the efforts of diversifying the police department so that it is reflective of the citizens being served, this electric current of systemic racism and oppression has forced the police chief to resign. In her words today, the chief outlined questions that all of us should consider. Chief Chapman mentioned in her statement that it was mentioned that she lost the confidence of the department. Whose confidence did she lose? Was this a collective vote, or was it the will of a privileged few? We believe today that it was the will of a privileged few, hell-bent on maintaining this systemic structure of racism and not equality. Ironically, this continual effort to dismantle black leadership in Portsmouth is an affront to true progression, liberation, and justice for all. Howbeit the powers that be continue to disrupt progressive movement and yet overlook the moral imperative to halt the fraternal order of Portsmouth Police President, who is comfortable with calling another member of the team a trunk monkey. This type of behavior is indicative of the systemic racism that is allowed to exist within our governing structures. How is it that our elected officials are quiet and comfortable about recent deaths in the Portsmouth City Jail and the Hampton Roads Regional Jail? Quiet on the front of the disparity study while we still disproportionately award contracts to majority white vendors and disproportionately disenfranchise majority black vendors. Quiet on the front of food insecurities and deserts that exist around our city, yet we continue to build luxury apartments and put all of our stock into the hopes of other business developments instead of esteeming our number one resource, which is the citizens of Portsmouth. We don't need to remind all of you, but we will take the time and the liberty to remind you here today that at last we continue to find our voices marginalized at the agenda of this electric current of systemic racism. While it is very disheartening and certainly should have no place within the limits of the city of Portsmouth, we find that the Commonwealth of Virginia is still struggling in the same vein. However, this is where we draw the line in the sand and declare enough is enough. But where do we go from here? And what are we demanding as a branch of the world's largest civil rights organization? One, Mayor Rowe, you have a responsibility to this community to outline why Chief Chapman was removed. It is not enough to hide behind the veil of staff or a city manager. That is not leadership, that is cowardice. Number two, the Portsmouth NAACP continues to push for new body cam policies and use of force policies that is updated to standards set by Noble and reform policing modules to ensure that we have policies that are fair for all people and not just a privileged few. And to those in our community who don't quite understand the importance of this constructive firing of Police Chief Tanya Chapman, you might not see it now, but you may see it 2 weeks from now when your granddaughter or your grandson is pulled over for speeding a little bit going down High Street. And when they pull your grandson or your granddaughter over, believe me, you want police officers who answer to Tanya Chapman and not to systems of racism and oppression. This today affects every citizen in this city. This today is not just about policy. It's not just about someone's job. It is literally death and life. Ask Sally Chapman whether it's about death or life. Ask Walter Brown's wife, is it about death or life? Ask the family of David Warren, who was shot down in his home by Portsmouth Police Department. Ask him whether, and his family, whether it's death or life. Ask Marshall Franklin whether it is about death or life. This department has continued to perpetuate systemic racism. But now, as a branch, we've come here to encourage our people. Don't fall behind the pen of a city manager. Pay attention to the power of those who yielded. Pay attention to those that put pressure on her to make a decision to remove the police chief here in the city of Portsmouth. No one will shed accountability in this moment. Everyone now holds a place responsible, and everyone now will be held accountable for the decision that was made last week. Today we offer our hope and our prayers to Chief Chapman. We want her to know that she's not alone, that hope springs eternal, that even though these now are trying times, the sun will rise again. She will lead again. And we hope now in our city that we will rise above this moment, but do so in a way in which we can make sure that this action will not be tolerated, and that we will make sure that racism is eradicated, and that this symbol, where this power of racism begins, is removed from Town Square. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Benita Richardson, the president of our Pan-Hellenic Council here, and president of our Pan-Hellenic Council here in Portsmouth, for a few words. Madam President.
I only come to say that the Portsmouth Pan-Hellenic Council supports the equal treatment of all people, and that we support what is right. So we stand with Chief Chapman and hope that all issues can be resolved.
Also note the president of Noble, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives, is here as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for coming here today, and they will have more to say tomorrow at City Council, but we do wish to express our sincere gratitude for Noble being here today. And with that, I'll take questions from media or anyone here.
Yeah. So far, city leaders have been pretty quiet about this, not taking any questions. Yeah. How do you guys plan to hold them accountable for what happened?
Well, first of all, and this is a part of our demand too, every citizen should show up tomorrow to City Council at 6:30. The only way that silence can be accepted is if we don't show up, if we don't raise our voices. So the first thing is we want citizens to stand up tomorrow at City Council to ensure that not just about a job of an individual, but about systemic racism is not going to be allowed here. You're not going to continue to remove those who look like us and it be acceptable. It's not. And that's the first thing that we need to do to hold them accountable. Then, secondly, we have to make sure that we have a set of policy directives that we want to demand within the Portsmouth Police Department. Let me emphasize this. This is a department that is systemically racist. Again, reports after reports, even recently, of members of the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union, calling black superiors trunk monkeys. I mean, this is the the environment that exists downtown that we're not being truthful about, which is what Chief Tanya Chapman was trying to change, the culture and the spirit inside of the department. And so what happened was they rose up to remove her. It is 2019. It's the form of lynching, 2019 modern day lynching, and that's what happened here with Tanya Chapman.
And James, earlier today, we went over and tried to speak with the city manager, who Tanya, in her letter, very much pointed her finger at her, making accusations about several things. We all read the letter.
Right.
How do you feel about the city manager not? She ran from us when we just tried to talk to her today. How would you respond to? How do you feel about that?
Well, again, we want to focus on where the true power rests. And we believe that the city manager was an instrument to bring about a certain decision. Certainly, again, we're not shirking responsibility. We don't agree with the decision. We don't agree that the decision that she made. We understand that she deals with personnel. However, there's a higher structure that put pressure on her to make a decision. And that structure we want to make sure that we address. And again, I say to the mayor, don't hide.
And so the mayor, who else do you want to hold accountable? Who else would you say we should be asking questions to? Who are the people behind the accusations that you're making here today?
City council, the mayor, the leadership of council. We need to be asking questions of the fraternal order of police inside of the police department. We need to be asking questions of how we're hiring, practices on how we're hiring, how we're promoting officers to rank. And let me say this, before Tanya Chapman came in, she was the only person of color that was in a position of leadership above the rank of lieutenant. And when she came in, she brought in 2 assistant police chiefs that were black, one black female who's the current interim right now, and then Assistant Chief Williams. So she tried to diversify the department. But again, those who we need to hold question to is the leadership of this city, who right now has fallen silent. You cannot hide behind personnel. As I mentioned, that is not leadership, that is cowardice.
Have you talked to Tanya today?
We have talked to Tanya before today.
How does she feel about what you guys?
Chief Chapman, excuse me.
How do you feel? How does she feel about what you're doing here today? What she said to you about?
I think she offered her gratitude. She was extremely thankful. Emotions are raw for her right now. She released her statement this morning and outlined what she felt she needed to. And but I think her overall attitude was that of being grateful and appreciative. But she also wants to make sure that we focus on the things that she was focused on, which is policy, and not get so hell bent on a position.
I knew that you had mentioned.
Say again, come forward. Yeah, I mean, there's things that Chief Chapman was trying to implement, and certainly one of those things was leading towards that. I think she did have a ride-along program where citizens could ride along with officers. But more importantly, I think she was trying to build relationship. I think she was trying to get very granular in the relationship. Not, it was made mention earlier that that some inside the department had an issue with her bringing officers to communities that had most of the crime challenges in our city. Well, she believed that we needed to get into those relationships and build those relationships so that people in that community can have a relationship with the police department. Again, that is a dramatic turn from what we traditionally had. And whenever you disrupt that order, the order downtown, and you disrupt the order as we saw with Dr. Whitaker, this is what happened. They used whatever systems that they have. In Dr. Whitaker's case, they used the legal system. In this particular case, the first thing they tried to do was to besmirch Chief Chapman's character and say that she wasn't doing X, Y, and Z and that she lost the trust. Well, as Chief Chapman said this morning, it's impossible to lose the trust of people you never had the trust of in the beginning. So I don't know if that was it, but we ought to be concerned that our leadership wants to take a direction change from diversity and inclusion. That symbol is what we all should be paying attention to, and that's the most important thing here today that we want to emphasize.
Do we know that she's definitely trying to not leave the current interim chief in there? Have you heard anything about that? Because have you talked to her?
The interim chief?
Yes.
We have not talked to interim chief Green. We've had interactions with interim chief Green before she was in this position. Let me say that we look forward to conversations, but to be honest and frank, we have concerns. With her policing style, and we hope to get more traction with that in days to come.
So I want to make sure we're all getting this clear. Are you painting Dr. Patton as part of a victim here, not as the culprit, as Chief Chapman herself more or less pointed to her, not the council?
No, I think the victim here are the citizens of Portsmouth. I think the victims here, are those citizens who continue to fight for equality and justice, and particularly the victims are those citizens who are pulled over by these officers who have these extreme racist tendencies. Those are the victims here today, and that's who we're concentrating on going forward.
And when we talk about that with the police department, I mean, what Chief Chapman was very, spoke highly of a lot of the people in the police department. What would you say, is there a percentage, or how many people are we talking about when you say, those racist accusations from the police?
Oh,
What would you say? I mean, how much of that are you?
Oh, sure. Well, we're following it very closely and followed it before Chief Chapman arrived in 2016. Give you an example. There was an officer that was involved with 5 shootings of unarmed African-American males. And that officer, before Chief Chapman got here, was being promoted up the ranks. And we were very concerned about his interactions with community. And even now, the Virginia pilot released his name, so it's fine for us to release his name, Todd Thursby, who was involved with a lot of investigations going forward. And she, again, tried to get those types of philosophies out of the department, which is what that email that she sent out, that the FOP distorted and tried to make it seem as though she was against her own people internally. And that's what they do. They try to turn people against one another. But the reality of what Chief Chapman was saying is, if you don't believe in diversity and inclusion, and if you don't believe in 21st century policing and community engagement, you ought not be here. And we stand behind those statements still today. That if you don't believe in that, and I'm going to tell you, Margaret, this is who should be worried. Those officers in the department, regardless of your color, if you care about the citizens and you care about life, you shouldn't be concerned with your job. But vice versa, those of you who are in the department, including FOP president and those in leadership now, I want you to hear me now. Your jobs will not be safe. We are not going to stop until we make sure that you are no longer a part of that police department, because, again, lives are at stake here.
Some people have, critics of the former chief have said that morale is down, officers are leaving, and there's too much violence in Portsmouth. That were some of the reasons that they were given. What would you say in response to those accusations?
We have to talk about it in 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, you can, I mean, even the culture of what we're saying now, I mean, you had 19 police chiefs in 25 years. So
that's the morale.
Yeah, I don't think that Chief Chapman had much to do about that type of morale. I think she was trying to change it, and she was trying to make it better. But again, when you're a part of that structure, you don't want change. You want things to stay the exact same. And even now, with us, in terms of the policies that she was working on, releasing publicly those officers who've been involved in officer-involved shootings of unarmed African-American males. Chief Chapman was trying to be transparent about that. She was trying to speak to things that affect black and brown communities. She was very specific. And let me say this as well, we didn't agree with Chief Chapman on everything. There were things that we disagreed on. We disagreed with the progress of change. But disagreements are natural in a relationship. But it doesn't mean that you remove or unjustly terminate and constructively fire someone that was doing their job.
How do you guys still encourage citizens to not be discouraged because of this? Not discourage citizens, and as well as people who are potentially going to be in the police force. How do you encourage them to still have hope for diversity and acceptance in the city?
Yeah. But Dr. King said that the more arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And we believe that now here today, that we don't lose hope. We don't lose hope as a people. We've been through more. We've been through slavery. We've been through segregation. And we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. And the only way we're going to get through this is if we rally together. Put aside our differences. Put aside our petty disputes and say, you know what, in this moment where we have systemic racism, where this monument that was promised to be removed from Town Square yet still exists, the Pettus Bridge still remains. Racism still remains. And as long as we come together as one people and together as a community, we can make sure that this system is eradicated. But hope springs eternal. We never lose hope. We just continue to march forward to that blessed day where all children are created equal in this country.
You had talked last week about reaching out to the city manager and to acting chief set up meetings to discuss moving forward and where you're from here.
Yep.
Have you had any direct contact with them since then, including setting up those meetings?
Nobody has heard from Interim Chief Green. We've reached out to Dr. Patton. We still hope that those meetings will take place because, again, there's policies that we still need to focus on in our city regarding law enforcement community. But to date, we have not been successful with setting up those meetings. And I would say to Dr. Patton, and I'll say this very openly, if you feel like you are pressured to make a decision, you ought to say it. You ought to say it, and you ought to. If you're an elected official, it's always best to stay on the side of genuine truth, not made up truth, not truth that you want the citizens to believe, but genuine truth. And we know here today that the truth is that Chief Chapman was constructively fired. Even though the notice said terminated, every sign points to a firing. When you're not able to go to your office and clear out your desk, when the resignation is immediate. Usually with resignations, you'll have a delay time, a transition time, certainly in time where a position of police chief. But we know, as Chief Chapman said this morning in the statements, she was forced to remove. She was given an ultimatum. And we say today that you gave the wrong ultimatum to the wrong person. The ultimatum should be given to those officers who propel this racist system. And I say to the citizens that in election time, we ought to give an ultimatum to city, to council. If you're going to stand behind that, then the ultimatum is you stand with us or you'll be removed. That's the ultimatum we need to put before them today. And also this, we believe that Chief Chapman should get her job back.
Yes, we need her. We need her for change. City council members were not aware.
You give her a job back, and then there's some council members who need to lose their jobs.
Right.
Would you be supporting legal action on the behalf of Chief Chapman?
That's a decision she's going to have to make. I would say that she should explore it, and if I was in her shoes, I would explore it. Any other questions? Yeah, well, yeah. Black communities and black suffrage has always been a human rights issue. Even if you go back to Dr. King and elders of our movement, they've always made it a human rights issue. It's those who perpetuate racism that make it a black versus the world argument. And what we're saying today is that even though, yes, we're part of a human race, but African Americans, black folks, have disproportionately been disenfranchised in this country. And we look at here now in the city of Portsmouth, where we're continually disenfranchised, not only in education. Look now, we just had a budget overview where I seen that the education, support of education, the budget remains flat. Where if you don't invest in the education of our school system, that is majority African American in this city, but then you have an issue. And we have to be truthful about the reality of today. Yes, we want all people to be equal. Yes, we want opportunity for and fairness. But that opportunity has not been given to our community as it has been others. So we're going to speak towards it. We're not going to be scared. We're going to stand up and tell the truth. And then those that don't like it, well, they can just deal with it. Thank you. Thank you.
I observe a lot that goes on in Portsmouth, and when she came the first year, you know, I observed and got more involved in the community because I had stopped for a while. And next thing I know, that I saw that she wanted change, but then some of the officers, I'm not gonna name them, stood up and told me, who do people think she is? Before we had her to come here, we were doing fine. No, they won't. Because I remember talking to the previous chief myself about some issues that I wanted to address, but he was never available.
Well, let me say this at the outset that when you have, first of all, and Chief Chapman spoke to it in her statements, that some people just didn't want to take directive from a black woman.
Right.
And that's from the jump what she was dealing with, but she was courageous. She didn't shy away from it. And let me say too, even with hard conversations, you know, it's difficult when you have a NAACP that's wanting and pushing for changes, and you're kind of housed between the department and the community. But she wasn't afraid of those conversations. She would stand there. She would take the conversation. She would be honest about it. And even though we disagreed, we could sit at the table and talk about a constructive way forward. That's a different environment from what we had previously. We would get silence, and we would get, you know, there's nothing that we can do, and these structures of racism were protected. Well, you ought to know now the reason why they are fearful, the reason why they got to council members the way that they did, and let's be clear, the Fraternal Order of Police had the ear of council members, and that's why that decision was made. And we got to be very honest and open and transparent about it, because if we're not, we won't fix it. And that's the thing. It was pressure. It was pressure that was put on her. Now, irregardless of the pressure, Dr. Patton did make a decision. So we're not saying or eradicating responsibility, but we do want to make sure that we know where the power rests in this city, and it is in a majority vote in city council. And right now, you can put 2 and 2 together about the majority vote here in the city of Portsmouth. See you tomorrow at 6:30.